Okay, and so if you were just using a correlation, like what kind of number is reasonable? Say you had two similar questions, like does it need to be like a 0.9 or something, or is a 0.6 good, or?
Some people say that about 0.6 would be acceptable for that. And it probably depends on to what extent these scales have been used and developed before. If it's something that's been refined over a long period of time, you might expect it to be a little higher than 0.6. But different, I've seen a lot of different references to, depending on where one's coming off the lines, they'll pull up a reference that they like, but I've seen some say 0.6, some use something as high as like 0.8. So it's, if you're above 0.6, you're probably good. And so this is that issue where you see, you're doing a survey and you see the questions that are pretty similar. They have several questions that are supposed to go together, and then they'll do some sort of analysis like this afterwards. So, you know, what this is telling us is that people are consistent in their responses. That if we administer the same test at another point in time, we might get the same results. Or if we have different questions that are supposed to measure the same thing on one survey, people are answering consistently or not. But if we do find they're answering consistently, it's just telling us that they're answering consistently. That in itself doesn't tell us that we're measuring what we think we're measuring. We just know that people are answering the same. And so that's where this issue of validity comes in. And so validity then, it's this assessment of are we measuring what it is we think we're measuring. And again, we can think about the overall validity of a study or the validity of a measurement. And so study validity is looking at things such as our research design. And then to what populations would our results generalize to, an example of that. And then measurement validity, it refers to, we have different types of measurement validity, and I'll talk about each of these: content validity, predictive validity, and then construct validity. So with respect to internal validity, we can think about the strength of our research design. So we're saying that we're testing these constructs, and we have some relationships that we're trying to develop, and we might have some experimental design. And internal validity deals with, did we have a design that allowed us to test those relationships that we think we're testing? And are you guys familiar with the concept of flow? Csikszentmihalyi, he's a psychologist who developed this idea. It's like a state of mind that we would enter into, not only in leisure, but we get to enter into the state of mind at like work and things like this, and it has to do with a loss of consciousness of, a loss of, you're focusing on the activity, so you're sort of losing awareness of other things that are going on around you. You have a loss of a time perspective, so time just kind of flying by. Feedback of the activity, how to succeed in activity is really clear to you. And so an example that's always often given in the recreation field is like fly fishing, where you're just like really focused on seeing if the fish is going to rise to catch your fly. A lot of the work on flow, it does suggest that people are actually in flow often at work as well. But so it's a state of mind that where there's this merging of action and awareness, loss of time perspective, and clear feedback and so forth. An example that I had for internal validity, some researchers wanted to test the effect of freedom of choice on flow. And so they used college students, and they conducted this experiment where they recruited people to participate in this experiment, and they said that they were going to be testing, it was like this, what they call motor memory effects on this motor skill. So it's like, I don't know if you've gone to an eye doctor and there's like these lights that are flashing up on a screen. Kind of pictured it being, they had to like follow these lights on a screen and then like do some sort of task. But they said that's why these people were coming into their study, is is to do this little task on this computerized screen, and then they were going to test memory and see how well they could do the second time around. So they had people had to wait for like a certain amount of time. And what they did is they told people that they needed their jewelry and watches because of their extensive electronic equipment in the screen. Yeah, this was like in the early 80s, like 70s.
I was
So
gonna say,
probably-
where was the IRB?
Human science. Yes.
And so the people then they said, okay, you have to wait like, until you test it again on this equipment. And then they put people into this room, and then the research assistant came in and said, oh, my advisor says that you can help me. I'm developing a game for people in hospitals, and I want to have you test out this game. And then they had different groups, or one group, they said, okay, we have 2 games that you can choose from, or you don't have to participate in the game, you read magazines, and there's magazines about. Other groups, they didn't give them a choice of the games that they could play with, or they even a choice of reading magazines. And so their hypothesis was that people in the group that had more freedom of choice, they should be more likely to get into a flow state, since they're volunteering to do this, more so than this other group. And so, the results supported their hypothesis that if the people in the high freedom of choice control or group were able to experience flow more often. They measured flow by asking people how much time they spent playing on the game versus that experiment they did with the electronic equipment. And also they asked them to recall details of the room. And so they're saying if people underrepresented time that they played the game and they weren't able to give many details of the room, that's like that they were in flow. And so anyway, they set up this experiment to measure this concept of flow.
So were they measuring how long the people were playing, like was there a camera watching how long the people were playing the game?
Yeah, so they knew, yeah. So they knew how long they were playing the game, and then they knew how long they were doing the other task. So, the question being then, okay, was their design adequate to introduce this concept of freedom? So they're saying freedom then influences flow. Did they have adequate research design to measure freedom? External validity, that refers to what population the study results might apply to. So they use college students, would that apply to the general population as well? Something unique about college students. A lot of times if we're doing, sometimes in survey research we can assign people to groups ahead of time. Sometimes we're assigning people to groups after the fact. So if we wanted to look at like the influence of education or age or something, maybe we would have a list ahead of time where we know people's age and education, we can sample from that. But sometimes we're just administering a survey and then placing them into groups after the fact. So the internal validity then would look at questions like, do we have enough people in each of those categories to test our hypotheses and things like that. Measurement validity, that becomes a pretty critical aspect for trying to determine if we're measuring the constructs that we think we're measuring. So measurement validity refers to the accuracy of what we're measuring. And how are we measuring the constructs that we're intending to measure? And we can think about 3 different types of validity. Criterion validity. This is associated with prediction and making relationships with other variables. Content validity, and this refers to whether or not we've measured all aspects of the construct that we think we need to measure to